for our competitiveness.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Ribble.
Thank you, Chairman Ryan, and thank you, Secretary, for coming. I've enjoyed the conversation so far, and I've especially appreciated your tone. I think this country, more than anything, needs to really have an adult conversation among ourselves about what we want to see for the future, particularly in entitlements. And I think you brought a bit of that adult tone today to this hearing, and I wanted you to know how much I appreciate that. Before I ask one other question, yesterday I heard from the President that this budget would stop adding to the national debt. Do you concur with that?
Well, what this budget does, again, on our assumptions for what if Congress enacts this, it will reduce the deficit to a level that achieves what we call primary balance, meaning it's balanced except for interest payments. And for an economy like ours, growing at the rates we expect over time, meaning our economy normally grows somewhere between 2.5% and 3% over the long run, that means you have to get a deficit around 3 or slightly below to achieve primary balance. And if you achieve that in the time frame we're suggesting, then you will stabilize our debt burden, net held by the public, net of financial assets, in the about 60%, high 60s, 70% of GDP range, and that is a level that does not threaten future growth. That's a level that is sustainable over time. Now, we don't hold that over time because without doing a better job on health care costs, without building on the Affordable Care Act, those deficits will start to grow again, and the debt will start to rise again as a share of GDP, and that's why, again, it's so important to move.
Because doesn't the debt actually
yield for a second on this?
Yeah.
I don't see how you can square Mr. Carney, is that your new press secretary's name, Carney, Mr. Liu, and the President's comment that we're not adding to the debt. Your own table, S14, the debt goes from $13 trillion to $26 trillion. Debt subject to limit. How can you say you're not adding to the debt? The statement wasn't deficits; it was debt.
I'm just making a point about math and economics.
What? I'm looking at your own chart.
If you get the deficit down to that range, you need to get it slightly below 3% of GDP.
The deficit.
The deficit. When you get it to that point, if you can hold it at that level, then the debt stops growing as a share of the economy. And the question is it still going to be too big at that point? And it'll be, again, net of financial assets, the assets we hold, net held by the public, will stabilize roughly around 70% of GDP. That's the level we can sustain. But it doesn't hold for a long period of time because, again, the healthcare costs start to eat away at that over a longer period of time. So you have to go beyond that.
Yeah, because
it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. That's a way to think about it.
Yeah, the numbers I saw yesterday had added about $9 trillion to the debt in the next decade.
Well, the period between now, again, our deficits are unsustainably high.
Yeah.
The period before you get them down to 3, absolutely you're adding to debt. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And the debt's growing as a share of the economy. That's why you want to move as quickly as you can. You can't put it off indefinitely. In that period when you're trying to get it from 10 to 3, the deficits are so large they will keep adding to the debt, and the debt will be growing as a share of the more rapidly than the economy as a whole, and that's what makes them unsustainable. But once you get it down to 3, you'll stabilize them at a level that's more acceptable.
Yeah. Do the assumptions, though, take into consideration that if the economy begins to recover like it's proposed, that don't interest rates typically go up as well?
Well, you're right. The economic assumptions that matter most for this are how fast does the economy grow, what happens to interest rates, what happens to inflation. And as I said before, there's no certainty around these things. It's a matter of judgment. And ultimately, and this is a great strength of our system, CBO's judgments will govern the choices you make. And as the chairman said, when CBO estimates the impact of our proposed policies on the economy over time, they're going to show slightly higher deficits than we've shown in the budget.
Just to changing gears a little bit, do you know what percent of mortgages are currently held by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, U.S. household mortgages? Is it in the high 80s or 90%?
No, it's not that high. If you look at on an ongoing basis, the share of mortgages financed today in the market, a very substantial fraction of those are by the combination of Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA. Their combined share of new mortgages today is well north of 80%.
Okay, north of 80%. Well, what assurances can we give the American people that we're not going to have another housing crisis as a result of that high risk? It's not spread out across the economy anymore. It's kind of held into the GSEs.
Right. Well, 2 points on that. One is, as we said last week, we need to wind them down and bring capital back into the mortgage market. And we propose a series of graduated reforms that will make that possible over time. And that's absolutely essential to fixing what was broken in the system. And we're not prepared to live with the mess that helped create this crisis. Now, it is important to recognize that you want to do that in a way that's careful, because you don't want to be adding to mortgage costs, hurting home values as we start to recover. So you got to do it. You got to do it carefully. But one point about Fannie and Freddie: the losses that they face today are the result of the mistakes they made during the boom. On an ongoing basis, looking forward, the guarantees they're making today are on much more conservative terms, more equity in homes, better underwriting standards, and they're more expensive guarantee fees. So that's why the independent estimates have looked at this, suggest that we're at the peak of losses likely, and those will start to come down, and we'll start to get more of the government's, the taxpayers' investments back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Chairman Ryan.
Mr. Pasquarello, are you ready?